Time then for the press preview. It's our first look at what is on tomorrow's front pages, taking a look at the headlines tonight. The Guardian's chief political correspondent, Jessica Elgot, and the Spectator's deputy political editor, Katy. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's have a look at some of those front pages before we speak to our guests, starting with the Mirror, telling the story of Tammy Prescott, a terminally ill mother who says energy bills mean she can't afford to properly enjoy her final days with her two young daughters. The Eye has word that a next-generation Covid vaccine will be rolled out in the autumn, specifically designed to tackle the damaging Omicron variant. And in fact, that's also the lead story in tomorrow's Times. From Scotland, The National carries a poll which found that no matter who becomes the next Prime Minister, support for independence will likely increase. But in the Express, Liz Truss pledges that she'll fight to stop the breakup of the union. The Guardian hears Whitehall civil servants could strike after they learned of plans to cut their payoffs in the event they're made redundant. Let's slide in the Metro, reporting on the rape trial of Manchester City footballer Benjamin Mendy. He denies the charges against him. And that's also the main story for the Daily Star. The Daily Telegraph says the Royal Navy is planning to end its role in combating the influx of illegal migrants crossing the Channel. According to the FT, China has cut one of its key lending rates in an attempt to soften the economic blow of the pandemic. And don't forget, you can scan the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme. Check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us discussing them. And Jessica and Katy are with me. A very good evening to you both. Nice to see you. Lots to talk about. Katy, why don't we start with you? Page 4 of the Metro, Keir Starmer's energy plan. Critics say about time. Gordon Brown was giving his thoughts, wasn't he, a few days ago, and there were questions asked about why Sir Keir Starmer was taking so long. What did you make of today's announcement?
Well, I think what benefits Keir Starmer is ultimately, as you point out, Gordon Brown, the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, have already been out of the blocks proposing quite similar things to the Labour leader in terms of all talking about freezing the energy price cap. But the Tories have not come out with anything. So you can criticise what Keir Starmer is, ultimately you don't really have any direction from the government because you have a Prime Minister and Chancellor who can't make decisions. And you also have two Tory leadership contenders who don't want to get into the details. And I think that does mean he looks on the front foot, at least compared to the opposition.
Jessica, this idea, Keir Starmer says, will bring down inflation by 4% because it's for everybody. It doesn't matter how wealthy you are. Everyone is going to benefit from this. Is that a sensible policy?
To a certain extent, there are obviously other things where it's wiser to make sure it's better targeted at the most vulnerable, and often the cost of living help has been directed through universal credit or done through council tax bans in order to try and get it to the people who need it. But I think the reality is that a bill rise per year of £2,000 to £3,000 is ultimately something that's going to have a huge effect on most people in the country. There are very few people who can really truly afford, without some knock-on effect, to be paying an extra £200-300 a month just on their energy bills. That's going to affect, even if they can afford to pay it, it's going to substantially affect their spending, and that can have big knock-on effects on businesses. They won't be going out to eat. They won't be saving up to buy a new car. They won't be saving up for a deposit on a house. And so therefore, actually, because the crisis is so broad, as Labour was saying today, and Starmer was saying in some of the interviews today, that it is right in this instance to take a broader approach.
Yeah, I mean, a £4,200 price cap expected by January. Clearly something needs to be done. Katy, just looking at the Mirror, mounting pressure for price cap freeze, pictures there of Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak as well. Is what's been announced today by Sir Keir Starmer going to put more pressure on the two candidates?
I think it does, simply in the sense that you now hear what Labour will do, and that just begs the question: well, what would the Tories do, given they are the people in government? And then I think if you're looking at the specifics, we know that Liz Truss was talking about no handouts just a week ago in an interview with the Financial Times. So that position appears to have evolved to a degree, now saying there would be some emergency relief. But I think it does make it harder for the two candidates to keep going through the contest without giving details. We know that Rishi Sunak plans to set out figures after the price cap is confirmed. That's the 26th of August. But given that he seems to be fairly far behind Liz Truss, ultimately, I think it could be too little too late for him to unveil his policies late in August. But it will at least put pressure on Liz Truss to set out what she might do in that emergency budget she's been talking about, besides the tax cut she's already pledged.
Yeah, front page of the Mirror, Jessica, once again highlighting the concerns that people have, that things are going to get worse, but also highlighting the real issues that people are facing at the moment. Interestingly, the Mirror did the same thing earlier today, highlighted one particular story, one story out of so many.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stories are absolutely heartbreaking. And the two of the MPs who I, happen to be speaking to today told me two different stories. One where was talking to a local FBU, Fire Brigade union official, who said that they were very worried that people would not put their heating on, but potentially start fires in their homes to keep warm. And another one who was telling me about how families were telling him in his constituency they were sending their children away to stay with their grandparents because they couldn't afford to feed the whole family or to keep the heating on enough for the whole family. And this is the thing about this is these are the struggles that people are already having because of the high costs of living, never mind if prices continue to go up. And I think that's some of the things that people have also been saying in a way about the Labour policy, is that actually it stops things getting worse, but there are a lot of people already in dire trouble, even with the help the government is already giving, and potentially you need more help even than the Labour policy is offering in terms of targeted support for those who are extremely vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a criticism, Katy, hasn't it, that Sir Keir Starmer's plan sounds great on paper, but it's only a short-term plan. It's only going to cover the next 6 months. What happens, come spring next year?
Well, I think this is the problem. Ultimately, it depends on the energy market, and this is something which is beyond any domestic government's control. And you can't legislate for all the factors that are pushing energy prices so high, including the war in Ukraine. And therefore, how do we know that things are going to be better in 6 months' time? And I think that looking at some of the things that the Institute for Fiscal Studies, Paul Johnson, has said, which is, you can talk about how which Labour are trying to push this idea that this is good because it will, stop inflation hitting a certain figure. But that is just temporary. At some point, that is going to get in the system, unless we are just, for a sustained period, keeping this in place, which would have a huge effect on public finances. Some likening it to the
Yeah, we're struggling a bit with your connection there. I think what Katy was alluding at there.
I think some people watch.
Yeah, let's go to Jessica just for the moment, Katy, because the line is breaking up. Jessica, Martin Lewis, the money-saving expert, is saying that this crisis needs to be looked at in the same way as the pandemic was looked at. It's as big as that in terms of affecting people's lives.
Yeah, and actually, when Ed Davey launched his version of this, that's what he called it. He called it an energy furlough scheme because the magnitude of the intervention is so much, and that the impact, the shockwaves that will be felt through the whole of the economy because of these rising prices are immense. I mean, even today, the BBC was running a story about a place in Glasgow, a Chinese restaurant that had to close down because its quarterly bills went from about £1,000 per quarter to £10,000, and there is, small businesses just can't sustain that, and especially they can't sustain it if people stop spending money in their businesses, because they also have, far higher bills to pay. So there's so, just like COVID, the energy price crisis just hits so many different parts of the economy, and that's one of the reasons why I think people see it as needing another big intervention.
OK, well, let's move on to another issue, still concerning money and the difficulties that people are facing. It's on the front page of the Financial Times. We'll just try your line again, Katy. Tell us about this, 50-year fixed-rate mortgages.
Yes, I think lots of people are currently quite relieved that they managed to, if you have managed fix your rate in the past 6 months, given how high they're thought to go. This seems quite an extreme version, which is fixing a mortgage for 50 years, which they're pitching as a way to tackle with inflation, one of these ideas. Of course, in doing that, you can see some of the appeal, but I think personally, you would hope that within 50 years, or at least in that period, things get a lot less bad than they seem to be in the immediate future.
Yeah, I'm just having a look at the detail of this to see if you've got any idea of what the interest rate would be. Could offer rates of 4 to 4.5% on the 30 to 50-year loans. I mean, it's quite a gamble, Jessica, isn't it? Because that's quite a high interest rate, and you're stuck with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those of us who are sort of lucky to fix a mortgage for a longish term, when rates were much lower than that, but when over the course of the 50-year period, who knows, perhaps you do end up, like, maybe it ends up averaging out at about that. I mean, you hope it doesn't get an awful lot higher, but people in my parents' generation remember paying much higher interest rates than that on a mortgage. So potentially, if you're not the gambling type and you like to know what you're doing, then it might be one for you.
OK, we shall head to a break. Thank you both for the moment. Chat again in a minute. Coming up here on the Press Preview, we haven't really talked about COVID, have we, for a while? But a new jab could soon become a game changer. We'll explain why next. Welcome back. Part 2 of the Press Preview. Katy and Jessica are still with us. Katy, you've moved to another part of the house. Let's hope the signal's a bit better there. Excellent, excellent. So, some good news, which is unusual at the moment. Jessica, the new Omicron jab that is coming out in the autumn.
Yeah, and the UK is the first country in the world to authorise this jab from Moderna, and it means that millions of people this winter will get a jab that should specifically target the Omicron variant and other variants as well, I think. But we're still waiting to see who exactly is going to be eligible for that booster jab, and expecting it's going to be, it's more likely to be those in the more vulnerable categories, rather than all of us who got booster jabs just as there were those big rises before Christmas. Although, obviously there's a chance that we could see a surge of COVID again in the winter. It feels like we've got to a place now where the NHS is able to cope with that, even if we do see another surge.
I mean, let's hope so, because, Katy, we're going to have enough to contend with, I think, aren't we, in the autumn and the winter without another serious COVID wave?
Completely. I think if you think about all the winter pressures that we have coming up the track, you would hope this vaccine will just help to make sure that COVID isn't one of the major ones, because with the NHS backlog, of how tricky that is becoming to clear, and also just generally, I think if you think about just the general backdrop of this winter, which would be, rising prices, lots of people struggling to heat their homes, that will have repercussions. It would be really tricky to combine them with a wave of the pandemic again. So you hope this is in the past and vaccines have transformed the situation, and therefore news like this should be something that helps to keep us in the place and not go backwards.
Yeah, Jessica, do you feel that we've had enough messaging from the government about what the next stage is, what the next plan is when it comes to boosters and autumn boosters and the like? I mean, understandably, perhaps the government's gone fairly quiet on COVID and on the programme, but do you think it's time that perhaps we did have a bit more of an idea? Because, of course, those boosters that we had are beginning to wane.
Yeah, and I think also the reality is that people might have got, this might have been the priority messaging for sort of local health services for GPs, and that's shifted somewhat, because as people try and deal with the backlog, as GPs try to deal with all the appointments all the extra appointments that people are making, and the pressures that they're facing, that it's not actually at the forefront of all of the public health messaging, for either from the government or from the NHS. But that is something, when we're already seeing what looks like a winter, sort of winter pressures on the NHS carry on through the summer, particularly when it comes to ambulance waiting times, which are under huge pressures across the country, beds in A&E. Then added to that, a COVID surge is obviously going to be very unwelcome, and so it is probably you'd expect to see some of the messaging around getting your booster, ramped up in the coming weeks, especially because, inevitably there's probably going to be some drop off in take up.
Yeah, and Katy, I don't know if you saw that story today, reports that we've run out of monkeypox vaccine. I mean, you do worry slightly that we're not necessarily. We need to be on the case of this still, don't we?
Completely. And we all saw, I think everyone was taken by surprise by COVID in many ways. Even people who early on thought this was going to be a problem. I think it changed our, for so many, diseases and scares previously, which didn't lead to that at all such a mass scale. I think it was a reminder of how these things can escalate and how you do need clear public health messaging. And therefore, I think monkeypox is one example of this. And also just knowing who should be the priority, when you need to do things like that are important. And I think with COVID specifically, I think everyone's very relieved we can live a much more normal life now. Lots of people return to their old habits, but in order to keep it that way, I think some public health messaging can go to good use.
Yeah, OK. Let's have a look at the front of The Guardian. It's not very often I say that it's a very welcome sight, seeing the rain. People with their brollies up. These are some women in Glasgow taking cover from the rain as those storms came. Even tonight, really heavy rain here at Skye, and it is good news, Jessica.
Yeah, I think it is, and it's really hard. It's really unusual us to be praising the rain coming in the middle of August, but we have seen such an extraordinarily hot summer, with temperatures getting so high, record-breaking temperatures, and drought predicted for many months, potentially, into the new year. And the rainfall, I'm in East London, the rainfall here actually didn't last very long at all. It was felt like going out to do a rain dance to make it last a bit longer, to give the garden a bit of a drink.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll see some of the footage of the rain falling a bit earlier on today. We've got some pictures from Cornwall and also from Ireland. But of course, really heavy rain, Katy, is an issue because the ground is so baked that what we don't want is this, flash flooding.
Yes, completely. And look, I think given all the drought warnings, the fact there is water is seen as a relief by lots of people who wouldn't normally want it to rain in August. But as you say, extremes of any sort and weather are dangerous. And that is something we're going to have to watch out for. I think it's also an interesting one where lots of people are now being faced with, the prospect of a hosepipe ban, but also seeing water fall, and therefore does that curb their behaviour when it comes to following this guidance if they're seeing things that they think goes against it. So there's all these things to take on board when you're trying to work out what to do.
Exactly. OK, Katy, Jessica, thank you both.